Hey folks, Kevin here. Well, it's February 21st, 2018. We had a bit of a warm spell today, and I got out and shot a little bit of video footage. It's been pretty windy, but that'll be going, those couple of videos will be going up over the next week. And today I got a couple of questions or comments. And what I'm going to try and do, just to remind everybody who's a subscriber, I'm going to try and do an Ask Me Anything as soon as I get a few comments or questions. But one came up today that I really wanted to get a quick response out to, and this isn't a medical one. This is, bear with me one second, Sam Koss. Said, hi, I've done the same as you, and this was with regards to composting weed series, day one. So this was back last summer. I've done the same as you and have gotten all the weeds from my land and made a massive heap. I did this I did this 5 days ago and have just made a long thermometer and pushed it deep in the heap in various places, and the only reading I'm getting is between 50 and 65 degrees Fahrenheit. Any idea of where I've gone wrong? So what I'd say first is first question is, what's the ambient temperature? What's the air temperature where you're living right now? What's the weather conditions? Is it real rainy right now in your location? Like right now where we are, we have the big snow melt, and there's been a lot of rain as well. And our temperature, although today it got up to over 60 degrees Fahrenheit, that was odd because our high normal this time of year is about 32, 33 degrees right now on February 21st. And of course it fluctuates from year to year and from day to day. But that would be our high average, and down into the 20s at nighttime. But so that's the first question. What's the weather conditions like? And whenever I hear someone say that they've made their own device, the second question is, what's your confidence that it's, have you tested to make sure your thermometer is reading accurately? Because if you've taken, let's say, a thermometer and you've used different types of metals, and your connections aren't great, well, it isn't going to be a really accurate one. And that's why I gave some, in some of my weed series, in my composting series, I put links to the long thermometers that I've purchased on Amazon.com because there's so much inaccuracy. So I have, if you watch some of our other videos, I have different thermal sensors all over the buildings that we built underground in the thermal mass and all. And each one is there's possibilities of inaccuracy. Now, if it's a digital system that you're using, they have to be calibrated based on the metal, the length of the wire, and all. So those would be things I would check as well. So weather, environmental conditions, and what's your confidence that your instrument is accurately reading? Now, let's say your thermometer is accurate. You're in a warmer part of the country and the temperatures, let's say if your ambient temperature is 70 degrees and you're getting a 50-degree temperature inside the pile, it makes me think that something's wrong, your instrument is wrong. If the ambient temperature is 50 to 65 degrees and that's the temperature that you're getting in your pile, then we move on to the next set of questions. So how big is your pile? In order to thermophilically, using aerobic composting techniques, in order to do that well, we have to have a pile that's probably about 3 foot by 3 foot or 1 meter by 1 meter, somewhere around that size, in order for the temperature to get up to the optimal range. So size of the pile means an awful lot. Moisture content. If the pile is too wet or too dry, you won't have the microbes within the microorganisms within that compost pile start up right away. It'll take quite some time for them to do it, and they may never even get close to the thermophilic, getting up into the 140s, 150s, hitting up to 160 and all. So those are things. So the size of the pile, how compacted the pile is, and the moisture in the pile. So those are three things. So if it's a lot of weeds, like your 5-foot tall, 6-foot tall weeds, and right now in our part of the world, I live in New York State, central New York, in America, and we're at the level of the Great Lakes. Where we're located, it's winter here, and the weeds that I would be harvesting this time of year would be almost completely carbon. So one area that I found that people have gotten confused about before, when they rake up their leaves in the fall and they rake up all these beautiful brown leaves, and they know that leaves are full of nitrogen because they're the photosynthetic unit on the trees. Well, before the leaves actually fall to the ground, or shortly after they fall into the ground, their nitrogen is gone. All of those heat producing components are no longer in the leaves. That's why they're brown and all. They're all carbon. So if we don't have enough nitrogen in our pile, and we just have a whole bunch of carbon, that's another reason that the compost pile may not come up to temperature. Let me see what else. So like the weeds that we have around here, let's say in the composting weed series, if you saw when I was pulling them out of the keyhole garden, I pulled a lot of weeds that were probably 4 or 5, some of them 6 foot tall. And I would grab a hold of their stalk, the trunk of the weed in a sense, and just yank out a root ball for that weed at the bottom, and there'd be soil on it, and I'd bang off the bottoms, then I'd throw them in the bucket of my tractor. Well, even though that hadn't turned brown yet, it's sort of like a tree in a sense. There's so much fibrous components to it. The relative ratio of nitrogen to carbon is relatively low in those stalky parts. The leaves on those that were still green, they had lots of nitrogen. But if you look at the relative ratio of nitrogen to carbon in those weeds, unless they were the small weeds, something, the herbaceous, short little plants that were, let's say, like your green grasses, as long as they aren't too fibrous, not like the tall ornamental grasses, and let's say there was also there was dandelions. There were a whole variety of different weeds, but I separated out the dandelions because I won't let those go into the compost pile. So I hope that helps out some. So really, if you haven't got enough nitrogen in the pile, if you've got too much water or too dry a pile, if your pile isn't adequate in size, at least 3 feet by 3 feet by 3 feet, a cubic yard or a cubic meter, if the pile isn't compacted down enough, and typically, and I haven't gone over this very well in videos yet on composting. It just makes me realize how much more I've got to do on composting video series. Creating a compost pile using different components. Let's say you've got some manure, some kitchen scraps as well. You've got the weeds. You may have some grass clippings. You may have some leaves. And I would suggest that it's okay to potentially have separate piles, small piles of these different components, and when you have enough of the volumes of these different components, then creating the pile in layers so that it's almost like a lasagna. You're making multiple layers and mixing up all of these components to start out with. And then you're doing like I do, like take the outside and turn it on the inside once we're up to temperature. But we've got to get to the point where we're getting an adequate size pile, have great confidence that the thermometer is reading accurately, not have it so loose that it won't get air, make sure that it's not too moist, not too dry, make sure we have the right components, enough nitrogen with the carbon that's there as well. All of those things should help you to get a good composting system. But the most important thing I want to say is keep at it, no matter what. Write down, and everybody usually has a phone nowadays. You could get out and record some video. I should do a video on Evernote's, one of the programs that I use to keep records in. And just keeping records of what's working, when you started and all. Now, I'm always doing composting, and I've been doing it for years. So it's, every time I run into a little glitch in the system, and there's always glitches, I think, it's never going to get old for me, composting. I'm always learning new things. So record keeping going at it, trying to find resources for other materials. Awesome you're using the weeds, because there's so many beautiful nutrients in there, and the weeds, if it's those big fibrous ones, you're really creating a good resource. After that breaks down, you'll see some of that fibrous material still there, and that sort of compost that isn't where the fibrous materials aren't completely degraded, I think that does really well for some of our plants that like higher fungal components. So not like our brassicas, our cruciferous vegetables, they like a little bit higher of the bacterial component. But when we get into some of our other crops, and I'll be doing series on this, on where I want the compost to be for the various different crops that we're growing. So it isn't all the same. I'm not putting like the same compost on all beds ultimately. In the initial part, I'm building the beds that way, yes, but it's making sure that I have a balance. We have the correct succession of the soil building microbes to be optimally create the plants that we want. So Sam, I hope that helps out. I know I'm a little long-winded with these as well. And Dan No Name, I think I know who you are. You and Thea look so healthy. It was good to see Thea in the video with you. I don't know if I could handle all that kale. I'm not a big fan of kale. Dan, kale is good for you. And if you make smoothies right, you won't even taste the kale. I know it tastes a little bitter, a little bit stringy, but when it's pulverized in a blender, and you get a good high-speed blender, a really powerful one, like the one that's in the link below that video. And that's the storing fruit and making smoothies video. I encourage you. Fiber, which there's a fair amount in there. Certainly all your legumes, your seeds, your beans, your chickpeas, they're loaded with fiber, and they really help us with the short chain fatty acids. That can really help out our health situation, especially as we get older, and we can combat these age-related disease processes that go in our bodies. And the kale is just loaded with so many potent phytonutrients. The darker and deeper and richer the colors, the more we need to get those into our bodies. And by making smoothies, we can take salad components that we really like. I don't care for arugula that much, and I never cared for kale that much in the past. And we're going to show some videos on ways that we're even using the broccoli stalks to cook with, because we're trying to, one, we can make it taste great, and once we retrain our taste buds and all, and I know that sounds kind of off, but by gradually reducing some of the salts, oils, and refined sugars, those sweet, fatty taste, salty tastes that we're all addicted to. Once we start reducing that, our flavor palette really opens up, and with appropriate seasonings, then it feels like you're eating like a king or a queen. So just trying to get you to eat more kale, Dan. So anyways, I really appreciate everybody's comments and and chiming in on the channel. I think it's awesome. Everyone's doing it. Christopher Wilson says, "Yum. I prefer more greens in there, but go mate." Maybe he's from Australia. And that's what I ate today: the broccoli, microgreen, oil-free hummus, and black beans. Yeah, more greens in there, more power to you. Awesome. So eat your greens, folks. It's really good for you. Beans, berries, legumes, all the various nuts. Get your mushrooms into you as well. Loaded, and if they've been out sitting in the sun, you're going to get your vitamin D. So, best of health and wealth to everyone. I really appreciate everybody contributing to the channel. Sam, let me know if this helps out with your project with composting as well. Thanks so much for watching, folks. I really appreciate it. Have a great day. Give this a thumbs up if you think it was of value, and pass it on to your friends. Take care. Bye-bye now.